If you have a true scary story you'd like to hear featured on the channel, then go to mariesfield.com and send it my way. And of course, thank you. This was something that happened to me and my friends back around 2011. I don't want to give away much about where I live because this event kind of left me a bit paranoid. So, all I will say is that it is not in the US. I grew up in a pretty small town and it wasn't the best one in our city either. It had a healthy population of addicts and street workers. It wasn't uncommon to see someone sleeping next to a building or people making blatantly obvious deals right in front of you. You just look the other way and try to be as non-existent as possible. This, of course, was taught by my parents, along the idea of it's not polite to stare, and as I got older, I understood that mentality too. When I moved out, I stayed close to home, maybe 20 to 30 minutes from my old neighborhood, but it was never forgotten. When my dad passed, my mom moved in with my aunt, her sister, because she couldn't bear to live in an empty home anymore. They live close to the same neighborhood, so when I went to visit them, I would drive by our old home and reminisce about the good memories there. When I'm not being sappy, my friends and I do like to enjoy each other's company, typically outdoors and typically with drinks in hand. This event happened one of those nights. It was me and two of my mates hanging out at an old decrepit park. Kids haven't visited here in many years, being it was falling apart and a new and updated one was constructed nearby. As long as we didn't make a scene, people typically left us alone too. After talking a bit, we got on the topic of abandoned and rundown buildings, and Liam mentioned a house nearby. After talking more about it and the liquid courage fueling us, we all wanted to check it out. All of us came from similar backgrounds, and while I wouldn't call us thieves, we would help ourselves to some things found in long abandoned places, typically to sell and get ourselves a bit of extra cash. We never directly stole from people or broke into obviously used and inhabited homes. We left our car at the park and we walked to the house since it was only about a kilometer away. As we approached, you could definitely tell the place had been left for nature to take over. The grass was overgrown, the bricked path to the door was cracked and uneven, the weeds were climbing the walls of the house, and all the windows were covered by boards. As we stood near the entrance, trying to get through the gate, I started getting that eerie feeling that something bad was about to happen. Being who I am, though, I wasn't about to back out and told myself it was just the booze making me feel ill, and I let it go. I helped Liam break the latch, and we walked towards the door. The doorknob itself was beyond being called a doorknob, so with just a nudge on the door, we walked in. Stepping into the house felt like stepping into a time capsule. It was as if the owner left the place in a rush, but expected to return shortly after. There was a cup sitting on the coffee table with something dried at the bottom of it. A small plate sat next to it with what looked like a dried and shriveled up piece of food on it. There were still a few dishes in the sink, and a jacket haphazardly thrown on the back of a chair. Everything was then covered in a thick layer of dust. Even the cobwebs were covered in dust. We explored room after room, finding remnants of a life that had once thrived within those walls. But while the floral wallpaper that was now peeling from the walls made it look like a pleasant family home, one thing I did notice was the complete lack of photos anywhere. None on the walls, none on the tables or shelves. There weren't even empty places where they could have been. Right as we thought we had seen everything, we stopped in the family room to discuss what we wanted to do next, when I noticed Jack turn his attention to the wall he had been leaning on. He had now shifted his stance and was running his hand along said wall. Liam and I stopped talking and were now watching him, waiting for him to explain himself. Once he realized, he explained how there was a slight give in the wall and he could feel a small dip in it. We watched as he was able to trace a square along the wall and then turned to us to ask what we wanted to do. Jack was adamant that there had to be a good reason to cover that wall, as a normal hole would have just been patched. Since it was a large square, he felt like it was hiding something. Liam was a little braver than the rest of us, so he approached the wall as if he was going to check it out, and instead threw his shoulder into it, immediately caving in the wall. After we recovered from shock and laughter, we cleared the area a bit and looked in. I honestly expected it to just be a larger hole that we just made worse, but that wasn't the case. No, we couldn't just end it there with a weird house and nothing of interest. The hole we just recreated seemed to be a crawl space of some sort that went down a small tunnel. And of course, my friends are now more than willing to crawl through that space. Jack went first, then Liam motioned me to go, but I was nervous and something told me not to. After a shove, Liam went in, leaving me alone. I could hear them talking as I put my head in, and they mentioned there was a whole room on the other side. I paced there, annoyed that they left me, but I now wanted to join them, not wanting to be alone. So I reluctantly crawled through. And once again, I expected to see some kind of storage room, but this was set up like an entire bedroom. The first thing I looked at was the bed. It was a plain twin mattress with an old-looking quilt thrown on top of it. No pillow. Liam pulled back the quilt, and we were met with a very large, dark brown stain on the mattress. I immediately backed away and looked around the room. There had to be cameras and someone had to be messing with us at this point, but there was nothing on the walls. Just a single standing lamp that Jack tried and it actually turned on. I was a little relieved to have light, but then the unsettling feeling overpowered that. Knowing the power was still on and working in this, what appeared to be an abandoned place. I knew my mates weren't in any rush to leave, so I turned to look over the desk, which was the only other thing in that room. On the desk, there were scattered papers, most of them being newspaper clippings, and the clippings were all about the same thing. They were all about a string of unsolved killings from my old town and the next one over. It was something that I tried to forget about as a kid, and after the cases went cold and I moved away, I never thought about it again. My hometown had become the hunting ground for a serial killer. As a kid, I remember the fear that gripped our town during that time. They always targeted the same people. It was those that were down on their luck, the homeless and the addicts. I just remember hearing the stories on the news or when adults talked about them. I didn't understand the whole MO or target thing as I was still a child at the time. But what I did understand was that there was someone around that was hurting people, and it made me fear that the same thing could happen to me. Even to this day, I know I didn't fit the demographic, but the fear at the time was real, and seeing those clippings brought it all back. As I reread those articles and tried to make out the scribbled writing along the sides, I noticed Jack was trying to pry open the bottom drawer. It had a lock on it, but there was no key nearby or in any of the other drawers. So Liam did what he knew best and brute forced it, managing to break the lock and part of the wood off as he pulled on it. It was just another moment I wished we would have stopped and just left. In the drawer was a bunch of random but creepy items. There was a hairbrush full of hair, torn pieces of cloth, tarnished jewelry, and even a few pictures of random people. No one was repeated in the photos. It could have been anything, sure, but the randomness of the items definitely had trophy feels to it. And that's when I checked out of there. I demanded to my friends that we should leave. Jack seemed a little weirded out, but Liam thought it was all funny. Not having any other way to leave, I crawled back through the tunnel and left the house. I paced in front of it until Jack and Liam finally came out. We all joked about it, and Liam was adamant that someone was just screwing around for laughs. But the fact that the wall had been closed off seemed like someone wanting to hide a dark secret. We dropped it shortly after, walking back to the park and talking about anything and everything. But after going back home, I couldn't forget about what was in that room. I looked up the case, and after seeing it was still cold, I decided to make an anonymous tip. I called them and explained how I happened across a home and what I had found. I explained I didn't take anything, but how it seemed like it could be relevant. They didn't seem too interested until I mentioned the drawer. They said they would look into it, and that was the only time I talked to anyone about it. I still look up the case, and I can't find out anything about a new lead or a suspect being found, so I don't know if it was helpful or not. But the fear I felt being in that room, knowing that a potential killer or someone obsessed with them could have been in that same room, still creeps me out to this day. As a young kid, I knew I was pretty difficult to deal with. Not in the sense that I got in trouble, skipped school, and was a bully, but more so that I was very curious and tried to get into everything. My parents liked to remind me of how many child locks they had to put on cabinets, doors, even the fridge, because I would climb into everything. I even climbed over the kid gates. It was hard to get me to sit down. As I got older, the curious and ever adventurous part of me never died. My friends and I loved to get into places we shouldn't be. It was like finding a secret base that no one else knew about. We've explored woods, old tunnels, construction sites, and a few old buildings. But this time, we were really wanting to check out this old house that our school bus had always passed by. It had caught fire a couple years prior and was left condemned and abandoned. We didn't know who lived there prior, but the house was clearly left to fall apart. That just meant it was a free place to stake out with my friends. After school one day, I finished my homework and chores as I was told to do, and was given permission to go out with friends. I called up Roman and Shane and took off on my bike to meet them at our normal designated spot. We typically brought very little with us, being young and inexperienced. We knew it was probably going to be dark in the house with no power, so we all brought flashlights. Roman brought an old backpack that may have had a hammer or a small pocket knife in it. He always had some kind of tool to help us get into places. And that was about all we brought. Like I said, we were young and more so just wanted to check the places out more than anything. We rode our bikes down the street and around the corner to the house, and after not seeing any cars drive by or in the distance, we ditched our bikes behind the house in a small gravel area and started walking around to find the best way in. We didn't even try the front door, wanting to stay out of view, but the back door seemed to be jammed. We did, however, find a window that we could open, and the screen was missing, so that was our way in. Roman went in first, then me, and lastly Shane. Once we were in, we realized just how much damage a house fire can do. Most of the walls were blackened. There were spots where the walls were peeling, where it was burnt, revealing light parts of the wall. I don't know if it was paint or wallpaper. There were still charred remains of a couch, a TV stand, and a table in the living room alone. Everything we touched left a grimy, dark residue on our hands, like soot. Walking through the rooms and seeing so much stuff like that was left behind was almost haunting. There was a kid's room with charred stuffed animals, now hardened from the burnt fur and warped by the water from the firemen, I'm sure. So many things like that looked melted in place, like a cup sitting on a counter, now drooping over a plate. It was eerie, knowing someone lived here and had to leave all of this. But at the same time, it was an incredible sight to see, and one hell of an eye-opener for me when it came to fire safety, if I'm being honest. And the smell was pretty strong too. We had a burn barrel at my home. I was familiar with the smell of burning wood, treated and not, as well as odd things that I would throw in there like paper or old toys. And while the smell of burnt wood was present, there was another pretty pungent smell that I couldn't identify. I remember discussing it with my friends, but none of us knew what it was, but we continued on. After exploring the house, it was a single floor, my friend discovered the door that led to the basement. Roman and I definitely wanted to check it out. The floor seemed sturdy, and I didn't have any worries about it collapsing. Shane, however, was not interested in the basement. Going down there with just a flashlight was not something he was willing to do, but we compromised. He stayed at the top of the stairs, pointing his flashlight at the steps for us so we didn't trip. We would check out the basement, then come back up and leave. No big deal. We walked down the stairs, and it probably sounded louder than it actually was since the house was so still. Once down there, the same but subtle smell from upstairs was now stronger in the basement. However, it wasn't bad enough to make us leave, so we started scanning the area with our flashlights. Most of the basement was open, but there was a small hallway at the bottom of the stairs and a door on the right that we opened to get to the rest of the basement. I saw the hookup for a washer and dryer, but there was only one machine there. I saw a pile of clothing or something similarly soft close to the machine. But I remember that all of it looked fine. From what we could see, there wasn't much in the way of fire damage down there. So, if those were their clothes, why would they leave them? I figured they probably didn't get to leave with much, so I would want to take everything I could. Putting the clothing behind me, I continued looking at the room. On the other side, there were things that got a little more interesting. There were two long tables cluttered with stuff. There were a few plates and bowls with small remnants on them, glass containers everywhere that I now know were beakers, glass tubes, giant pots, rubber tubes, funnels. You get the idea. At first, I just thought maybe the people that used to live here were some kind of scientist or chemist. It looked cool at first. I approached the table and began looking at the items individually. The glasses had a dry brown crust on the bottom. There were bottles and chemicals all over the place, and the smell was absolutely coming from this stuff. But then I noticed the burner that the giant pot was sitting on. I reached across the table to touch it, and it was warm. It was recently used. I was ready to walk to the other side of the table to get a closer look at it when Roman called out to me. By the sound of his voice, I stopped and immediately pointed my flashlight at him. Looking at him, he looked terrified and was shining his flashlight past me. I turned back around, following his flashlight, to see a man trying to disappear in the corner. To this day, that man was the most terrifying thing I had ever seen in my young life. The man was mostly skin and bones. Maybe it was just the flashlight, but he looked pale. I could hardly tell he was wearing a white tank top, as it just looked like his skin. But other than the torn up tank, the only other thing he had on was a pair of just white briefs. From what I could tell, he either had super thin or short hair, or it was just patchy and balding. His eyes were horrifying. There were dark circles all around and deeply sunken in. His eyes themselves were very large and wide, like we had clearly startled him. But besides his actual appearance, what scared us the most was the large gun he was holding across his chest. Without looking back, I told Roman to run, and as soon as I heard him running, I turned to run myself. No sooner did I turn around, I heard a loud bang ring out. I nearly peed, stumbling up the stairs in terror. Shane was already gone by the time I got up. I ran behind Roman to the window, but then I could hear the thumping up the stairs. He was following us. I could hear Shane shouting at us from the window. Roman was just jumping through it, and I was right behind him. I practically fell out of the window, and we ran to our bikes, ducking to remain under the windows. Once we reached our bikes, we took off as fast as our legs would go and immediately headed for Roman's house, as it was the closest. Once we were there, we collapsed on the ground, trying to catch our breath and not have a heart attack. Once we calmed down, Roman and I explained to Shane what all we saw down there. Shane said he took off when he heard the bang. At the time, we didn't know what that home-cooked lab was down there. But what we did know was that we were trespassing and we weren't supposed to be there. And we knew we would be in trouble for being there. So we did what kids did best. We told no one. Thankfully, no one ever brought up hearing a gunshot to us, so we didn't have to fake that. My clothes did smell a little funny after that, but I buried them deep in my clothes basket, hoping it would dissipate. After that, we stopped going into places like that. If it was closed in, like buildings, we just avoided it. We still explored open areas that had clear getaway points, and we could clearly see that there was no one around. We were way too young and too small to fight off adults. I did learn years later that the lab was discovered by someone else, but they didn't find anyone down there. As an adult, it's a crazy thing to think about. I always saw our neighborhood as a wonderful and safe place, but I also realized how much my parents protected us, especially from things like that. Who knew what that man would have done? He definitely chased us that day, but did he just shoot to warn us? Would he have actually tried to shoot us? And if so, what would he have done if he did hit us and possibly killed us? No one knew where we were, so we could have disappeared and never have been seen again. So, just a few words of advice to anyone partaking in urbex. Always make sure someone knows where you are. Never go alone, and identify multiple exit points. It really could save your life. My friend Pedro and I were notorious for getting into some pretty dangerous situations. We've explored a few old and abandoned houses that turned out to be drug houses, as well as some other unsavory activities. We've trespassed onto properties that we also nearly escaped from, but at the end of the day, it was an adrenaline rush that we looked forward to. Sometimes we would take a souvenir, but it was rare. We preferred large, dilapidated buildings. We liked to see the places crumbling and imagining what it looked like in its days of prime. We also liked to get into crevices way up high and see what we could get into, maybe parkour in a way. That's where this story took place. I started dating a girl that lived about 45 minutes from me. We had been driving around her neighborhood when I spotted a large old brick building. It had two of those large chimneys on top and a chain link fence surrounding it. I asked her if she knew about it, and she said it was an old factory that used to make pesticides. After talking a bit more about it, she said her grandfather used to work there when he was younger, but it was shut down before she was even born. She knew I was into things like that, so she just told me to be careful and mentioned there being some underground tunnel system that they use to dispose of waste. So, that being said, I told Pedro about it, and we made plans to check it out. It actually wasn't that hard to find information on the tunnel below it, and I actually learned that some other urbex members had gone through it too. Some people mentioned that it seemed pretty creepy and that something felt off, so they didn't try to get into the factory. However, we were both determined to go through it. So, there we were, finally at the tunnel entrance, ready for a new adventure. After making sure no one was around, we crawled through the tunnel entrance. The fence covering had already been cut out. Once in, I was surprised to see the lights in the tunnel still worked. It was nice to have the light, but otherwise, I could definitely see what the others were talking about. There was quite a creepy feeling down there. There was nothing flowing through the tunnels and pipes, but there was a low humming sound the entire time. We managed to find the end of the tunnels, and there was a pretty weak lock on the door. Yes, what we did was not allowed, or really legal, so I do not condone our choices, but this is what we did. We were able to pretty easily break the lock, and we made our way into the factory. People had obviously been in here. Some things were pretty well scrapped and gutted, and there was graffiti on the walls. I assume they probably put the locks and possibly the fence because of it. One thing I did notice as we walked around was the dull humming sound continued. Nothing worked in this factory. There was no electricity running. No airflow, no water running, and none of the machinery worked or moved. But the sound was almost like some kind of machine. We walked around each of the tall machines, the walls and shelves. Between the size of the equipment and how tall the factory was itself, it made me feel very small, like an ant in a giant's home. But then it started to get weird. We walked towards a large vat, and the air became cold and heavy. Something was now feeling very wrong. I am not one to be spooked easily, but for some reason, my fight or flight was starting to kick in. I started looking around for someone possibly watching or following us, but the problem was that I didn't see anyone, not even Pedro. He walked over to the vat with me, but he was gone. I called out for him, but I didn't get a response. I started walking back the way we came and called out for him again when I heard his voice, clear as day, say, "Hey, stop messing around, man." I didn't know why he said that, but I knew he had to be close. I traced my steps back the way we came, and still, he was nowhere. I tried different parts of the factory, thinking maybe we just got separated, but I still couldn't find him. But then, as I approached a door to what I assumed was an office, I saw a dark shadow run by in my peripheral. I quickly looked up, but there was nothing there. But the air again got colder and was almost suffocating. Something was not right. I couldn't find Pedro, and we never split up like that. Something or someone was in here, and the air was just wrong. I called out once more for Pedro and told him I was out, hoping that if he was in there, that he would follow behind me. As I started through the tunnel, I could hear footsteps that were not mine. When I would stop, the steps would continue for a few seconds after. It also sounded like it was coming from behind me, but no one was there. I had finally reached the top of the creepy stuff I could handle and ran towards the tunnel exit. To my surprise, when I got there, Pedro was already out there, pacing back and forth until he saw me. He ran up to me and kept asking me if I saw it and where I had been. But I was the last one out, so where the hell had he been? He explained that he started walking towards the large vat with me when he saw a very large dark shadow walk between us, causing him to jump backwards. He had shouted something to me, but said he was confused when I didn't even react. I didn't look back at him, I didn't stop walking, I didn't jump, nothing. And I told him the reason I didn't was because I never heard anything. He stood there as the shadow seemed to linger over me, and when he heard my voice, but slightly warped, say, "You need to leave," he didn't hesitate. He's not a big ghost and paranormal person, so I get it. He ran out of there and hoped I was right behind him, thinking maybe I saw something in the large container. But to add to the bewilderment, he said he never said the "stop messing around" part. He was most likely long gone. So we both heard each other's voice, but neither of us spoke a word. I had to admit, I was pretty damn spooked too, so we just left the place. The next day, I was talking to my girlfriend about it and what we saw, and while she was intrigued, she also wasn't surprised. She explained that the place had been shut down because of how dangerous it was. She said the chemicals used in the pesticides they made were highly toxic and it actually led to a lot of health issues for those that work there. Some even died from it. However, the company said it wasn't their fault, claiming working around it wasn't a problem. It was whenever someone tried stealing it and spilling it on themselves. I guarantee no one was stealing pesticides, but that's just me, I guess. Eventually, the company was consumed by angry workers and families of those that died, so they eventually closed shop. After learning and researching this, I have no doubt that there are probably some trapped souls in that factory, and they were either angry with us disturbing them, or maybe they were trying to protect us from a similar fate. Either way, it was still an experience, and the only thing that really had me freaked out. I don't think I'll go back there anytime soon, but there was definitely something or someone there with us, and I will never forget about it. So that, my friends, was a collection of urbex stories or urban exploring. Always a good collection. I like listening to these and reading these because I could never do it. I think it's really cool looking at old buildings and stuff. I think one of them in the story mentioned how they like to imagine what it used to look like, which is kind of how I feel about it too. But I think if there are like tours of it, of places like that, kind of like old museums or something, like it's touring an old historical building would be cool. But I don't know if I could do full-on exploration like that, because I'm a scaredy cat, and I'd be like, I don't want to like get caught like trespassing or something and falling through a floor, because that would be my luck. So it's cool. I will read these stories and live through those of you that do stuff like that. So thank you for sharing those. But what about you all? Have you guys ever done any type of exploration like that? Whether it's urban exploring or other places that may have been, I don't know what I'm saying anymore. Urbex, have you? Yes? No? Maybe? Want to? Places in your area to urbex? I don't know. Let me know. Anyways, if you did enjoy this video, please do give it a like below. And if you'd like to hear more content like this, consider subscribing if you haven't already. And lastly, don't forget to leave a comment with your thoughts on the stories. Let me know about those urbex. Or I was reminded that this was the first week of autumn, which, bring it on. Very excited for it. The temperature is dropping a little bit here in Minnesota, which is very nice. I think we've had like highs of like mid 70s. So that's been nice. A lot cooler, and I like that. So I'm excited to see how it goes, since this will be our first autumn and winter here. So does anyone have any plans for autumn? Like anything you're looking forward to? But let's go ahead and wrap this up. So with that being said, friends, I hope you have a fantastic week and a wonderful rest of your day. And until next time, take care.